I am so thrilled to be here. Not many people know that I was born in Sudbury, so it's nice to be back to my hometown. My dad did move us when I was 6, so I don't have a lot of memories other than really, really high snow. But it's so great to be back, and thanks to Family Councils of Ontario for inviting me to join you today. I want to start actually by sharing this picture of my family. I want to give you the family perspective of what my journey has been like. So this is a picture of my dad, George, our son, Logan, myself. My hair was much darker back then. This was 2008. My husband, Ty, my mom, Carol, and our daughter, Taylor. And I started working with extended care in 2006, so I've a couple of years in my corporate executive career when this picture was taken. We knew that my dad had been diagnosed with Parkinson's, but what we didn't know was that a couple of years, maybe a year after this picture was taken, he was also diagnosed with Lewy body dementia. And as the only daughter, the youngest with 2 older brothers, it was my job to convince my mom to break the promise that she had made my dad years ago to never put him in an old folks home. It was not sustainable for her at home. Some of you can probably relate to this. Lots of 911 calls, trips to the hospital. She was losing weight and not coping well. And finally, I convinced her it was time to move into long-term care, which we moved my dad at the end of 2010, and he lived there for 6 months before passing away in 2011. Now, it was a few years after my dad passed away that, again, as the youngest daughter, or only daughter, youngest child, had to talk to my mom about maybe it's time to move out of your familial home and into retirement living. And it took about 1.5 years of convincing. She wasn't managing her medications properly. There was all sorts of things, those warning signs that we can see. And finally convinced her to reduce 70% of her belongings and move into a retirement home. And then it was 2 years after that I got the phone call from the retirement home, which didn't really have a relationship with me because they deemed her competent, said she can no longer live here. There's way too much care that she needs. And there I was now navigating a move from my mom into assisted living. And my mom lived in assisted living for about 3 years until she passed away in 2019. So I've had this family experience with both my parents. Now, at the time that this picture was taken, the other thing we didn't know was that my husband, Ty, was sick. And it wasn't until 6 months after this picture was taken, he had his first acute episode in hospital. And I'll never forget the moment when the neurologist came up to me and said, I don't know what's wrong with your husband. We've run brain scans. All I can tell you is that he has an unusual brain disorder. And like he literally did this. And in that moment, I knew that our lives had just changed forever. And that took us on a journey of, at that time, he could walk independently. Then he needed a cane. Then he needed a walker. And then ended up really living the rest of his shortened life in a wheelchair. We had home care coming every day, and then it was CCAC at the time, suggested that I enroll him in an adult daycare program. And then the conversation that none of us want to have, but it was Sarah, my case manager, said, you can no longer take care of him at home. Our kids were 11 and 17 when their dad got sick. Our house was like a 3-ring circus. I was working at extended care, commuting an hour back and forth each way. And it was a 3-level side split, all sorts of safety issues. It's time to move your husband into long-term care. And I'll share more about that experience. But what was happening for me was that I had these 3 distinct, powerful, profound, heartbreaking experiences as a family member. And I was working in seniors care at extended care at the corporate office. I knew more than the average person, but I was still knocked sideways with the experience. So after 11 years at extended care, I decided to walk away from my corporate job and start my own company, which I have been enjoying a lot of these kinds of conversations for the last 9 years. and wrote my first book, Recipe for Empathy, which was a book for team members to learn how to transform families into fans in seniors care. And then my second book, which we have copies of, Now What? And I've got a third book coming out in the spring of 2027 about a new way to care. And I'm going to be sharing a little bit of the work that I've done since Now What was written in 2020 with you today. A big part of that is this framework that I call the relational approach. And I'm going to go through each of these components, share some stories and some insights, and we are going to have, I think it's 3 small breakouts using relational approach spark cards, which I'll have here. So there will be some work to do, but ideally what I want to share with you is how these roadblocks are what I've learned to be those key things that are getting in the way of families and leaders and team members working effectively together. Have any of you ever had an experience where you feel like you're just not being heard or understood? Right? We've all been there, and I had my moments as well. And so there really is this, I bring this dual perspective because I have the work experience and I understand how long-term care works, but I've got this family experience and looking through this lens, creating this framework. So I want to start with the first one, which is about admission or move-in anxiety. And I want to share the 2 different perspectives. The first perspective is as a family member and sharing my admission day story. And then the second is the perspective from the team members. So my husband was only 63 when I needed to put him on the crisis list. And if any of you are trying to do the math, because it was back in 2011, yes, I did marry somebody that was older than me, and we were married for almost 30 years. And the morning I woke up and I kept wondering, am I making the right decision? Is now the time? Could I maybe sell the house and move into a house that's more flexible for his needs? How is this going to work? But we all know how the crisis list works, and you've got 24 hours and off you go. So I'm pushing him in his wheelchair to the front of the home, and I'm still questioning if I'm making the right decision. I get to the front reception and I say, "Hi, I'm Deb. This is my husband, Ty. He's moving into your home today." And she looks up from her paperwork and says, "Oh, right, we've got an admission today. Okay, so just go down the hall, turn right, get on the elevators, get off on the 2nd floor, and then as soon as you get out of the elevators, turn right, and then make a sharp left, and on the right-hand side is a door, and just go into that meeting room, and they'll be with you as soon as they can." Now, I'm left-handed, and that's my excuse for being directionally challenged. Anybody else left-handed here? Okay, I've got a left-handed.
That's a good excuse. I haven't thought about that one.
I've got a left-handed pen for you, so come see me after. And I'm sitting there, and the meeting was for 10 o'clock. I like to be punctual. I'm looking at my watch. It's now 10:15, moving closer to 20 after. I'm thinking, I'm in the wrong room. There's a whole team waiting for me somewhere, and we're not there. And just as I was about to get up to find them, the door swings open and about 5 team members come rushing in, and the first one says to me, "I'm so sorry we're running late. It's a really busy day today." I'm told I don't have a poker face, but what would be my inner voice was, "You're kidding me, right? You're having a busy day? Do you have any idea what our day looks like today? I am moving my 63-year-old husband into long-term care. This is probably the hardest, most heartbreaking day of my life, and you're running late because you're having a busy day." This was my first impression of a care team that was going to be shepherding my husband through the final chapter of his life. And remember, at this point in time, I've got 5 years of industry experience. I know how busy, there's no slow days in long-term care, but in that moment, sitting as his wife, as a family member, I felt completely unseen. They sit down and the DOC opens up that big black binder, it's already got Ty's name on the spine, and start asking questions. Does he prefer a bath or a shower? Let's go over his medications. What type of activities does he like? And the questions go on, and the pages get turned, and the check marks and the notes, and it felt like the further we got, the faster it went. And I felt like I had to be on my toes and have all the answers to all the questions. And then they asked the question that none of us want to hear or talk about. And it's that question about, if something happens, do you want us to resuscitate him? And he's sitting right there. I don't think I ever felt so alone in this room full of strangers, and it was taking all of my energy to hold back the tears. And they wrapped up the meeting, and they very kindly asked if I wanted to stay and join Ty for lunch. And I respectfully declined because I knew I wasn't going to be able to hold it back, and I was not going to fall apart in this room full of strangers. So I wheeled Ty to the dining room for him to meet his new table mates that he would be eating lunch with every day. And as I walked out the front doors of that building, it felt like I barely had any air in my lungs, and it felt like I had these huge cinder blocks pushing me down as I'm walking back to my car and wondering, now what? What does the rest of this look like? That was my admission anxiety experience, and it doesn't just last for that day. It lasts for days, weeks, months. In fact, they've done research to say that it's the resident who adjusts the fastest in their new environment. I know, right? I was surprised by that as well. And it's because they're the ones that are needing to adjust, where staff, they're the second group to adjust because there's lots of learning for them, but it's the families that take the longest, because not only are we adjusting to their new life in long-term care, but we're adjusting to our new life and our role and our identity, both within the community and outside of the community. Now I want to look at and share with you the other perspective, and it was a home that I was working with that I was helping them to redesign their admission process. And I was meeting with a group of PSWs to ask them, how do you feel the morning that a new resident and family are moving into your home? Now, what was interesting with this group was they kind of looked at me like, why do you care about how we feel? Nobody had ever asked them this question before. And I said, well, I care a great deal, because how you feel that morning that a new resident and family's moving in is going to affect how you show up, how you interact, how you do your job. So they had some paper to make some notes, and they were commiserating amongst each other. I think they were still wondering, I don't know what this lady wants from us, because this is just weird. And I brought them back together and asked who would like to share first. And the one who put up her hand, I think the PSW next to her was kind of pushing her arm up because she looked like she was being voluntold. And she said, okay, I just want to say I feel terrible saying this, but sometimes we almost wish that our new resident didn't have a family. And I said, okay, tell me more about that. And that's when the floodgates opened, like this pent-up anxiety and worry that they had was finally being unleashed. And one said, well, I just had a family member the other day tell me, you know, I pay your salary, you need to do what I tell you to do. And another said, you're not doing that right, my mom doesn't like it like that. And the other said, you know, we called the call bell 2 minutes ago and nobody has shown up yet. And it went on and on and on about all of these experiences and perspectives that they were having. And what I knew was they weren't terrible people. They weren't really wishing that the resident didn't have a family. What they were wishing for was that they didn't have to deal with a family that was going to be difficult, demanding, have unrealistic expectations, and that anxiety was worrisome for them. And what I also learned through this work is that they don't always perceive it as anxiety. It's just this low-grade energy that happens the morning that a new resident and family is moving in. And I was so grateful to learn that from them, because all my years working in corporate, I didn't have a clue. that's what was going on. And so what we have are family and resident and team members coming together, and we're starting this very key relationship in a relational deficit. We're not even starting from zero. And I want to share with you why that is. From a family perspective, did I make the right decision? Did I make the right decision to put their name on a list and move them into long-term care? Right? I think it's something we can all really relate to. I was still questioning that. So did I make the right decision? Can I trust the team with this person? Have I chosen the right home? Is this the right team? Are they going to be able to take care of them the way that I want them to be taken care of? And the third is, I don't know how to show up in this new role. So we've got this practical, we think about it. Am I making the right decision? Have I chosen the right home? And who am I now, and how do I show up now that I'm stepping away from being the primary or a co-caregiver, and what this is going to look like? Because most people, if they've never stepped foot in a long-term care home, don't know how it works. On the team side, we've got, will the family be difficult? Will they be demanding? Will they have unrealistic expectations? What do they believe about long-term care already? We all know the media is not always positive about long-term care. And there's challenges, but there's also amazing, wonderful opportunities. And so that's what they're thinking about. What's the family going to be like? And then they ask, from a relational perspective, will they trust us if they're coming in with these narratives? And if we're starting in a relational deficit, how are we possibly going to be able to build that relationship with them? And then the staff don't feel equipped or able to work with families who have concerns or challenges. A lot of times, and what I do training on the team side as well, is they'll either appease the family, just hopefully it goes away, which will come back to bite them, or avoid them. If any of you, as family members, you've ever felt like somebody doesn't want to make eye contact with you and they're heading down the hall in the other direction, because they're not always equipped or prepared to be able to work with questions or challenges or concerns, which happens in any kind of community living environment. So this emotional tension, as you see, it's contributing to this relational deficit. And so we have this confidence gap, the other relational roadblock, that both sides are not feeling confident just for different reasons. And so with the work of the relational approach and being able to embrace these elements, we want to be able to get to a point where the family feels validated. I always say to team members, the morning or the afternoon that the family is walking out of your front doors, leaving their loved one with you, you want them to feel validated that they've made the right decision. Sounds simple, but a lot has to happen with that. The home that I moved my husband to was my first choice home. But based on my admission experience, I was questioning if I'd made the right decision. And it took, over time, we built trust, and absolutely, but it started in a rocky place. And then, how do we build trust? You want to feel that you can trust the team in the home to take care of your person. Am I right? Right? And that you want to feel confident in your role. You want to feel confident that your role and your identity and how you show up, because it's a huge transition going from a caregiver to a care partner, which involves trusting the team who are doing a lot of the heavy lifting of care, the things that perhaps you were doing at home, or if your person was in a retirement home or assisted living. On the team side, it's to be able to help shift the perspective. Families aren't being difficult. They're overwhelmed. They're uncertain. They're looking for validation, right? Concerns and complaints, there's a reason behind them. And that's a big part of the training I do with the relational approach with team members. As well, we want to have the trust built from the team perspective. It's very important that you are able to trust the team, but it's just as important that they can trust you as a partner in care and that you're not out to get them, right? Which can become a narrative. And so as you see, when we're able to do this, this is my whole, I don't speak French, but I'm gonna say raison d'etre without the accent. Did I say it kind of right? Raison d'etre. Oh, yeah. You know, my whole mission is to be able to help build the confidence on both sides of the relationship. And that's why a lot of the work I do, I'm kind of in the middle, not as a mediator, not as a conflict manager, but how do we bring the sides together so that we can avoid those conflicts, or when there are concerns and complaints, work through them effectively. So I want to do the first breakout exercise. I've created these spark cards, relational approach spark cards, and the one we're going to look at is confident teams start with supported people. So the prompt, and you can talk as a table or in twos or threes, whatever works for you. How are we actively creating a culture where team members feel safe and equipped to resolve family concerns and complaints? Now this card was created for the team leader on the staff side, but this is also a very relevant card for those of you who are with a family council, because a part of family council in how you look at how you're onboarding new families. So you can think about from your perspective, or as a fellow family member, you've been a seasoned family member, a new family is joining the community, to think about what is the role that family council can play in creating a culture where the team members, the people who work in the home, feel safe and equipped to resolve family concerns and complaints. And maybe think about, maybe you've been in a situation as a family council member where you've been able to recognize some of the things that families can be doing differently to help team members feel supported. This really leads to this idea of the knowledge gap. And the knowledge gap is a big gap that can exist with a family coming in who doesn't know anything about senior living, long-term care. So I'm going to share a short video. This is a family member by the name of Carolyn that I met a few years ago, and she moved her aunt into long-term care, and this is her version of her knowledge gap.
I was struck by how cold the orientation or onboarding intake was. And I just thought, well, this is the way it is. This is the way it is. They can't do it any different. This is the way it is. So I felt very lost. I felt very lost. Like I am stepping into a whole new world. I know zero. And I think when you're in a world that you're so familiar with, you forget that people are lost. And I think I still have this expectation, maybe a hope that the new caregivers coming in, that the home can sort of revolutionize the way that we are doing intake, because I think it would help a lot.
What Leanne was talking about was feeling lost and how it felt cold and, you know, just not understanding how things work. And I think that's more common than not with new families coming in. Again, unless you've had some prior experience, it is a whole new world. And so I think of it as families don't know what they don't know, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault that the first time you get a phone call that says, oh, just want to let you know that your mom had a fall, she's okay, everything's good, and you say, what do you mean she had a fall? You're supposed to be watching her. I was told that you have 24-hour care. And yet it's not one-on-one. And so, and this is what I work with teams to say, you know, families don't know what they don't know, and it's not their fault. So when they're coming in with a knowledge gap, it is our job to help educate and support them. And that's why in Now What, I've got a chapter with 20 misconceptions. And the first one is, I thought my loved one would get 24/7 one-on-one care. It's a very common misconception, yet from a staff perspective, it would be, yes, we have 24-hour nursing, but it's not one-on-one all the time. And in fact, I think of it as, I wouldn't want to be tethered to another human being for 24 hours a day, and there's resident rights and autonomy and those types of things. But how we're able to educate our families to know these things. You know, I had a family say, I can't believe that they want to label my dad's clothes. He's not going to camp. right? And I needed to explain the reason why and the volume of laundry that's being done. So ideally, and as family council members, how can we support families in their knowledge gap and learning curve for a whole environment that they likely know very little to nothing about? The next is the emotion gap. And with the emotion gap, you know, we've talked about, and it sounds like you've all experienced this feeling of not only are you working through the logistics of moving your person into care, you're working through the emotions of that. The guilt, the grief, sometimes the relief, and then you feel guilty about feeling relieved, and the worry and the anxiety and all these things. You know, they say that 96% of Canadians want to age in place at home. I don't know what the other 4% want to do, but I think we can all agree that none of us want to live in long-term care. And that's no disrespect to long-term care. Worked in it for 11 years, the very valued partner in our community, but we all want to age in place in a healthy way at home. So it can make it very hard and emotional turmoil to make this decision. Sometimes that emotion can leak out in other ways. There was a family member I'm writing about in my new book that was telling me that she would visit her husband every day, and she had a good relationship with the team members. And so one day she's visiting him and he needs to use the washroom, and she knew that it was shift change and that she was capable of being able to get him to the washroom. And that's where she discovered that he was wearing an incontinent brief. Well, that was not in the care plan. This was news to her. She, in her words, lost her mind. She said, Deb, I went tearing down the hallway looking for the first nurse that I could find, and I'm just out of my mind about what's going on here. And the nurse did a great job, pulled her into a private room, pulled up the records, recognized that there was a communication gap, apologized, took ownership, that's all she could do, explained the thinking with what had changed. But as she explained to me about it, she said, it took me a few days, but I realized that it wasn't about the brief. It was about the reality and the realization that my husband was declining. I was losing him, and I didn't know how to deal with that. You know, as I think of it, it's not about the brief, it's about the grief that she was experiencing. And that's why with the emotion gap, they're not just meeting the family, they're meeting your grief. And I didn't understand myself that it was grief that I was experiencing with having my husband at that time, 25 plus years, father to our 2 kids, that I was grieving. It was my therapist, Angela, who wanted to have the grief talk with me. And I'm like, Angela, I'm not grieving. He's still here. Like, what are you talking about? And she explained to me that I was experiencing anticipatory grief. He's living with a life-limiting, degenerative, fatal disease. We are not overcoming this. And it was like death by 1,000 cuts. But there was also the disenfranchised grief. The grief I felt the first time I'm taking our daughter Taylor to a soccer game, which is what he always did. And knowing in that moment, he's never going to be able to watch her play soccer again. So I find that sometimes as families, we're not fully appreciating the grief experience. And sometimes, and I'll say this for myself, because I'm not saying anybody in this room has ever had this, but having a disproportionate reaction to something where the team, they're probably looking at you like, I don't know why she's so upset. But it's the grief that's coming out that we're still grappling with. There is a loss that's happening. People move to long-term care not to be cured, but to be cared for. And sometimes that's a really hard reality for us to live with. So that's the emotion gap. The next is the identity gap. And this is really the core message of my book that's coming out next May, because I've seen that this plays it feels subtle, but it is a huge shift that we all go through. And it really is that shift from being the caregiver to then becoming a care partner. And sometimes we may have a hard time feeling like we're stepping away from care, but it's just that our role is changing. I was doing a family education session a few years ago, and Shirley, one of the family members, she had read Now What, and she said, you know, it made me realize that I was unintentionally getting in the way of my mom's care. She had taken care of her mom for probably 10 years in her home. They were very close. Now her mom's living in long-term care, and she's there hovering, in her words, hovering over the staff going, why are you doing it that way? My mom doesn't like her sweater put on that way. Oh, you got to put the left shoe on before the right shoe. Like these different examples. That's the way that she cared for her mom at home. And she had this expectation that the staff would take care of her mom the exact same way that she did. And realizing and reading Now What, that not only is there a learning curve for her, there's a learning curve for the team members. They're getting to know your person. And that can take, well, up at the CARE conference is all about setting the baseline and understanding their likes and dislikes and preferences and how to best communicate with them. And so I've got this very fancy infographic to share with you. My relational triangle. And as Ty's wife, I'm his family member. I was the primary caregiver. I like control. I kept all the flights on time. I kept all the parts moving. And in a moment, he's still my loved one, but he's now become a resident in a community that has all of these team members on 3 different shifts that I haven't met, that are going to be providing care to him in different capacities, right? Recreation, food, clinical, all the things. And it took me, I may be a slow learner, and I'm not going to say it's because I'm left-handed, but it took me a few weeks. I remember pulling into my driveway at home after visiting him, and I sat there and I heard this voice in my head said, you're no longer the caregiver. You're a family member now. You're a residence family member. And that was this whole new identity that nobody gave me a playbook for, nobody gave me instructions. And I had all of this experience of the business that was not helping me as a family member. And so this identity shift is around that you're not stepping away from care, you're stepping into a new way to care. And sometimes the new way to care involves physical, emotional, financial, personal changes that are happening. And I've seen this over and over. I mean, when my husband moved into care, I had my kids who were 14 and 19, working full time, but there was still this huge gap of the things that we did together. He was the chef in our relationship. I had to learn how to cook. So, and how am I showing up in the community? So we're going to do another spark card. Families aren't stepping back or taking over. They're adjusting to a new role. So what helps me support families as they take on a new care partner identity? So again, think about your role as within family council or a family member that wants to support new families coming in. How can you support families as they take on a new care partner identity? Thinking about your shift in your identity when you became a residence family member. What are some ways that you've helped or that you could help? Does that make sense? They're coming in and maybe they're still wanting to provide the hands-on care. They're not quite trusting the staff. You can see the friction starting. What are some ways that you can help support them? I'll just give you a couple of minutes. The family role in the relational triangle is how will I choose to show up as a family member? Part of, once we can step into this new role and identity, I'm a residence wife now. I have a role to play in this community. How am I going to interact and interact with care team members? How am I going to show up? And this quote that I want to share with you, hopefully you can read that, is please take responsibility for the energy you bring into this space. And it's attributed to Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, who wrote a book called My Stroke of Insight. And she was about 36, 37 years old, a neurophysicist, who was studying strokes, and she experienced a catastrophic stroke. And she was in the hospital, and it was her mom who actually put this sign in her hospital room: please take responsibility for the energy you bring into the space. Because the part of her brain that was impacted by the stroke, one of the things it created this acute sensitivity to other people's emotions. So if a family or a team member in the hospital came in feeling nervous or agitated or frustrated or distracted, she would physically feel that energy in her body. And this is a great reminder for all of us, and I share this with team members as well. When we're walking into the home and we're there and we're present, what kind of energy are we bringing in, and how are we choosing to interact with people around us? And how can I respond versus react when issues arise? And heads up, there will be issues. Glasses will get broken, hearing aids will go missing, residents may elope. My husband was a famous eloper, but he took his cell phone and he even answered it and said he was at the pub down the street. He was high maintenance, right? So things happen. It's community living. Laundry will go missing, things will happen. It's how are we going to be able to choose to respond versus react, which I know it's easier said than done sometimes, particularly when the emotions are running and we get caught up, and we sometimes, I'll speak for myself, have a disproportionate reaction to the situation at hand. We always have that choice, and that's part of, there's a lot of things that we may feel we don't have control over. How we show up in our energy is definitely one that we do. So I want to move on to the next relational roadblock, which is about narratives or assumptions. And sometimes I think about them as judgments. So I'll share this story to really bring this to life for you. I was working with a team of their internal leads being trained on the relational approach in their home. And the social worker, Amy, was telling me that just that morning they had a new resident move in, a gentleman, and it was his two daughters that were the family that were moving him in. And the two PSWs went up to introduce themselves to the sisters, and they were not getting the warm and fuzzies. They were getting the standoff, look up and down, short answers, and the PSWs walked away from that, past Amy and said, oh, these two new family members, they're gonna be a nightmare to work with. They were rude, dismissive. You know, I tried to start a conversation with them. It just wasn't going well. I just hope that I don't have to work with them. And off they went, probably to the lunchroom, to start spreading word about these two nightmare sisters. So in the training that we were doing and talking about the power of curiosity, Amy decided to venture over into the lion's den and see what was going on. So she introduced herself, and she got the same, cold, standoffish kind of, and tried to, introduce herself, ask a few questions. And then she thought, what is it that I'm really curious about? And she asked this question, which I think was a very brave but profound question. She said, I'm curious, what are you most worried about moving your dad into our home? And the two sisters kind of looked at each other like, how do we even answer that? And the one said, okay, we might as well tell you because you're gonna figure it out sooner or later. Our dad has been acting really inappropriately. He's saying things that are rude, that never would have come out of his mouth before. And he's doing things that, quite frankly, are embarrassing, and it's getting worse. And we don't know how to deal with it. So we figure it's only a matter of time before somebody from the home is gonna call us up and say, yeah, you know what, your dad's too much. We can't handle him. You're gonna have to find somewhere else for him to live. And Amy, I'm just so proud of her because, first of all, she validated the sister. She said, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. This must be so hard for you to be experiencing and seeing this change with your father. And that's when she could start seeing the ice chips sort of falling off. And yeah, you know what? It really has been hard. This was a hard decision for us. And then she did very light education. She said, I don't know if you're aware of this, but probably 70% of our residents in our home have what we refer to as responsive behaviors or expressions. She talked a little bit about that. What you're sharing about your dad, we know that we've got to get to know him, we've got to learn about him. We likely will have questions for you because you've been able to provide a level of support. We may not always get it right, but we really want to work with you on this. And that conversation maybe was 10 minutes long, but I think of it as an intervention. Had Amy not gone up and had that conversation, the assumptions, judgment, narratives going around the home was difficult, demanding family, they're going to be a nightmare, stay away, avoid them, don't make eye contact with them, whatever you do, they're horrible people. And the sisters had this narrative that the home is just going to kick our dad to the curb because they're not going to want to work with him. You see how two different stories that are happening that would have translated into a friction-filled, heartbreaking relationship. But Amy was able to intervene, level set, validate, assure, understand, and then be able to go back and educate to the rest of the team. What you saw on the face level of this family is not what's going on. What's really going on is grief, there's guilt, there's fear, and we want to show the family that they've made the right choice, moving their father into long-term care, and they've picked the best home and team for him. Because we need to remember that limiting beliefs don't equal facts. We are assumption-making machines. As human beings, that's how we survive. We actually are hardwired to judge, give advice, and gossip. Isn't that lovely? It's how we connect as human beings. So that judgment, where you probably had judgments about, oh, I wonder what this presentation is going to be like this morning. You don't have to say it out loud to me, but right, we're always trying to size up our environment. And the same goes for if you're walking down the hall and you see a PSW that looks like she's just been sucking on sour keys. Oh, she must be in a bad mood today. We don't know. Maybe she just lost a resident that she'd been caring for years. And when I think back on my admission day and I was judging how the staff were late and transactional, I don't know if the DOC was on a call with a family member because something happened with their person. I don't know if a couple of the team members were running late from their home because they have annoying teenage daughters. Right? We don't know. And so being able to open up to think about what else could be happening here on both sides, which is why I so love that Amy shared that story, because it's a perfect example of that. And I talked about curiosity in my book, Recipe for Empathy. I've got a chapter on curiosity and how curiosity builds connection. Now, as 4-year-olds, we ask about 400 questions a day when we're 4 years old. Anybody who's had a 4-year-old, you know that to be true. But the older we get, the less questions we're asking, because somehow it's being beaten into us that we have to have the answers. And asking questions is showing vulnerability. But when we're able to be curious, like Amy was, I wonder, what are you most worried about moving your dad into our home? That was the breakthrough question. And sometimes it can be as easy as, I'm starting the sentence with, I'm curious or I wonder. So going back to the example of the staff are being very transactional, to be able to say, you know, I'm curious how we can build in some emotional check-ins with residents if we see that maybe they're having a hard day. Or I wonder what we could be doing differently to be able to give that eye contact, acknowledgement, open-ended question, right? So, and the thing with curiosity is it's a very soft energy. Like even when you think about when you're really curious, there's this openness. We're not asking curiosity questions in a way that we're trying to get the answer that we're looking for. We truly are asking a question we don't have the answer to. When we're able to practice, because it is a practice, curiosity, we're able to make deposits into the relational bank account. Because remember in the beginning I said we're starting in this relational deficit? Every time we are building trust, connection, collaboration. We're making deposits into the relational bank account. The woman who discovered her husband wearing a brief, the reason that she was able to really work through that was because she already had a surplus in that relational bank account. So it wasn't something that, yes, she had an emotional reaction. She would call it disproportionate, but it also was something that she could overcome because she was able to accept the staff's apology because the trust had been built, even though there was a crack in it in that incident. One of the common narratives that I hear from staff when I'm providing training and saying, you know, what is the biggest challenge when you're working with families? They get called difficult. Well, they're just a difficult family. They're difficult, they're demanding, unrealistic expectations. And there may be times where you may feel, I feel like I'm being a bit spicy here. I talk in the book about family flavors and being jalapeno, right? Being jalapeno spicy. I know for me, I could feel it when it was happening and I'm trying to pull the words back, but they keep coming out. But what if it's that we're not being a difficult family, but we're in a difficult family relationship with the team? Because when there's a team member involved, because you may also say, you know what, they can call me a difficult family, but sometimes they're a difficult team member. They're not getting back to me on time, the way that they're talking to me. But what if it's a difficult relationship? Because then that way both sides can impact and influence. I don't think any of us wake up in the morning deciding that we're going to be difficult wherever we go, right? That just takes too much energy. So to be able to look at that from that relational approach. The last relational roadblock we're going to talk about is around expectations. And I would say that this is a cornerstone relational roadblock. When I work with homes, when they call me and say, we're really having a challenging dynamic with the family and we need your help, when we go through, the root cause is usually because of an unmet expectation. So I want to share this formula that we have to talk about this before we can really dive into expectations, which is disappointment equals expectations minus reality. So if we think about it, if we have an expectation that our loved one is going to receive 24/7 one-on-one care, but the reality is it's 24-hour nursing care but not one-on-one, that space in between expectations and reality is where disappointment lies. Now I want to share with you a bit about the emotion of disappointment. Are there any Brené Brown fans here? So in her latest book, Atlas of the Heart, she talks about emotion. She's a researcher. And this is a really key perspective that she shares on disappointment. Disappointment is unmet expectations. The more significant the expectations, the more significant the disappointment. The unconscious, unexamined, and unexpressed expectations are the most dangerous and often turn into disappointment. In fact, the research tells us disappointment is one of the most frequently experienced emotions, and it tends to be experienced at a high level of intensity. So let's just take a beat on that. The first time I read that, I'm like, seriously? As human beings, the most frequently experienced emotion is disappointment? What, it can't be joy? It can't be happiness, it has to be disappointment. And when we do experience, it's at high levels of intensity. So this is not just about being a family member with your person in long-term care. This is life. And it is likely that from the time you woke up this morning to now, and hopefully not right now, you've experienced disappointment, right? It could be you're disappointed that you didn't hit every green light on the way here, but you hit every red light because they weren't synchronized. Or you pull into your favorite coffee shop and you order your coffee double and you pop the lid off and there's no cream in it, right? Or I always thought it would be so nice driving home if one of the kids unloaded the dishwasher. But maybe that was an unexpressed or unconscious expectation. So, you know, when we think about in long-term care where it's high stakes, when we're feeling, it's about noticing when you feel disappointed and what's driving that disappointment. So she finishes by saying, when we develop expectations, we paint a picture in our head of how things are going to be and how they're going to look. The movie in our mind is wonderful, but no one else knows their parts, their lines, or what it means to us. Disappointment takes a toll on us and our relationships, and it requires considerable emotional bandwidth. You know, the family member was disappointed that her husband was wearing a brief. She was disappointed that the team didn't talk to her about it. All of these levels, and then that's what contributes to the emotional strain or tension that can happen in a relationship. And so with teams, it's how do we uncover what families' expectations are coming in, understanding that they don't always know what they don't know and it's not their fault, so that we can get ahead of things and look at, and when you think about as family council members, what are the things that families are coming to you expressing disappointment about? And is there a knowledge gap that needs to be closed? Is there an emotion gap or an identity gap that you can support them with, knowing that unmet expectations can create disappointment, which then creates that whole mix of emotions and frustration and conflict and confusion and all of those things. I think it's important that both sides are able to share what can we expect from you as a family member or family council member, and what can you expect from us as team members? Because I'm always looking at it from the middle and both side perspective, because it applies to both sides. This isn't one doing more than the other. And so how are we expressing what our expectations are? Because if you come in and you're saying, well, I have an expectation that my loved one is never going to have a fall in your home, there's an education opportunity, because it's not something that can be guaranteed 100%. And the reason why. Had a friend of mine that moved her mother-in-law into assisted living, and she's called me and said, oh, we're so happy that Fran's in this home now, because now we don't have to worry about her falling. And I said, okay, time out. A little bit of education here. In fact, I said to her, it's possible and even likely, Sandra, that Fran may have more falls because she's in a new environment. And that could throw her with her level of familiarity. And the home will put things in place to be able to help prevent or lessen the impact of the fall. But we think we know what we're coming in and what our expectations are, and that's when team members can say, oh, they just have unrealistic expectations. Like, do they think that we can perform miracles here? It's a gap in knowledge. So our last breakout is with this spark card, which is clarity builds trust and reduces conflict. So the prompt is, how can we set shared expectations in a way that feels respectful and supportive? And I think that this really aligns when we think about family council roles, if how setting shared expectations in a way that feels respectful and supportive. And it could also be the example that you shared initially in peeling that back, because we want to make sure that there's respect and support from families to team members and team members to families. So when we think about the expectations versus reality, the expectation that I have compared to what you think the reality is there an opportunity to adjust, not lower, but adjust your expectation? Or if it's something that you really feel this needs to be met, how to have that conversation. And I think of when team members can assume that families have that unrealistic expectation, I invite them to consider that maybe it's an unknowing expectation. If there's something like, I have an expectation that laundry will never go missing, when this is a common one that comes up with teams. And so, well, how do you close that gap? Some homes actually will offer a tour of the laundry facility to families, because with the volume that they do, I mean, I live by myself and I'm losing clothes. And so being able to understand that the reality of community living is that laundry can get damaged or go missing, how am I going to manage that? Maybe I'm not going to bring the cashmere sweater in for my mom, kind of thing, right? That how do we have those areas of compromise?